Good evening. I'm glad you're here. This is Pastor Jeff Jones, and this is our Sunday evening message. And if you would grab your Bible, let's open that to Psalm 39. Psalm 39. And we're going to begin in verse number 3 in just a moment. I preached this morning from Luke chapter 18, and it talks about the impossible and the possible. And preached a little bit about weakness. And I want to continue that thought in the message tonight. And the Bible has a lot to say about weakness. And we're living in a day of great weakness in a lot of sense, a weakness that is not of the Lord. There is no strength, there is no backbone, there is no conviction or courage for right things. That's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about being weak, weakness in the sense of weak in the Lord. Paul said, when I am weak, then I am strong. And so it's a different kind of thing here. Someone can be very weak in body, but have incredible moral courage. And so God allows us to go through seasons of our life where we may experience incredible sickness, great upheavals or downturns financially. And in those situations, God can do in and through us what he couldn't do maybe when we were very capable. And so if you're there in Psalm 39, let's read verses 3 and 4 together. It says, my heart was hot within me. While I was musing, the fire burned. Then spake I with my tongue, Lord, make me to know mine end, and the measure of my days, what it is, that I may know how frail I am. So when I think of this frailness, I think about how weak we could be at times. This is one sentence here in verses 3 and 4. He's talking about how this thought, this idea, this question, this desire from that he wants the Lord to show him something. It's burning in his heart. And his prayer is in verse 4, Lord, make me to know. Help me to understand. Help me to see where I'm really at with this. Help me to understand how precious my days are. And I think, obviously, if you've been a Christian for very long, you understand, and maybe you're not even a Christian, you understand how life can be very, very short. And it is truly a vapor. It's like a bubble. And there it is, and then it's gone. And he says that I may know, make me to know, and that I may know how frail I am. And life just hangs by the balance, it hangs by a thin cord sometimes. And we live in such a tight conditions, parameters that for life to exist, it has to have a certain temperature range. And really in the course of nature, it's a very tight range that we live within. The air that we breathe, it has to be certain parts of this and that. The water that we drink has to be a certain way. And so we have all these things, and life is very frail. And David says, I want to know how frail I am. I want to know how weak I am, how needy I am. I want to understand that. I want to get that. And so not that he's trying to be a victim, I don't believe, but I think he's trying to understand his life, understand what he can and can't do, understand how precious the years, the days, the moments that he has, so that he would spend them well. And so out of that thought, out of this weakness that David talks about, this frailness, I want you to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And in the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Paul uses the word weakness 5 times. Now, he mentions weak in other places, and I did not count that, but I know there's weakness 5 times. And he uses the word weakness in verse number 25. And in this here, he's talking about foolishness and how God uses foolish things to confound the wise things of this world. It says in verse 25, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Foolishness and weakness is wiser, stronger than men, than mankind, than the wisdom of men, the strength of men. And God uses these weak things to say something, foolish things, base things. It goes on in verse number 26. It says, for ye see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are. And so he's given this little list here of the things that God has chosen to use. Foolish things, weak things, base things. He's chosen those things, despised things, to bring to naught the things that are, to confound the wise, to confound the strong, to confound those that are prideful and arrogant. God is dealing with a world that in large measure has thumbed their nose at him. And he's going to use the least things. And we are those least things. He's going to use what seems in their mind foolishness, the foolishness of preaching he's going to use. You say, why would God use that? Why would he not choose maybe the most capable, the most talented, the most healthy, the smartest? And he does use smart people. He does use rich people. He does use people that have great honor. But in large part, he uses people that are maybe not that. It says in verse 29 that no flesh should glory in his presence. We don't come before God and say, look what I did for you. Look at how blessed you are that I was there. It's more like, thank you for using me. I wasn't the straightest stick. I wasn't the most able. But I was useful. I tried to be faithful. And that's why we really try to emphasize that you may not be a talented person. Everybody has some ability, obviously. But at least you can be faithful. And God uses faithful people that are weak. Look over chapter 2, verse 3. It says, and I was with you, Paul says this, I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, and my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power. Paul said, nobody's going to glory in his presence, but God's brought us and used us, those of us that are weak, those of us that are afraid, those of us that physically, maybe literally trembling when we come into the presence or to do a work for God, that the demonstration, the showing, the manifestation would be of what God's Spirit can do, what his power will do in this world. The impossible is, it can't be done. The possible is this, that God can. God can do all things. God can make anything happen. God can change anybody's heart. God can save any soul. And so, and God can use any person. It's strange to me sometimes how God will use the least of people, a child. God will use someone that is very simple, someone that is very uneducated, someone that's very poor, someone that is in what maybe we would say a desperate situation, someone that they're maybe on their dying bed. God can use somebody physically gone, physically drained, and God could use them in a great way. Look over in chapter 15. We're taking just a little journey here through the Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 42. It says, so also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption. This body is corrupt. It's wasting away. It is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. There's that word again, weakness. It is raised in power. And so we lay down this life. We put this body in the grave. Weakness. Can't carry yourself there. You have to be carried by 6 or 8 other people have to carry you in that casket and lay you in the ground. You couldn't even get yourself there. Weakness. But it's going to raise in power, raise in great power. It's going to be changed. If you would look in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 2 more places here. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse number 9. Paul is in this place where he's got this thorn in the flesh. I'd say this, most of us don't want weakness. We don't want to be weak physically. We don't want to be weak mentally. We don't want to be confused. We don't want to be pressed. We don't want to be persecuted. We don't want to be in difficulty. We don't want to be in fear. And so Paul asks that God would remove this thing from him, whatever it is. In verse 9, we get God's response. He says, my grace is sufficient for thee. For my strength is made perfect, complete in weakness. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Paul says, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches, in necessities and persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. He couldn't know that. He didn't know that till he was weak. And you're not going to know it until you're weak. There is a great revealing time that takes place over the course of a person's life. We find out how unable we are, incapable of doing so many things. We find out how, I want to use the word pathetic sometimes we are. And then we also find out this. We find out about God's greatness. We find out about his great power, about his strength, about how he's able to carry us through the situation. He's able to do in us what we never thought was possible. And so Paul's learned this lesson. He said, therefore, he said, I'm going to take pleasure. I'm going to embrace these things. Infirmities, yes. Reproaches, yeah. Necessities, sure. Persecutions, right. Distresses, absolutely. He said these great humiliations. I've been to the hospital, I don't know, many times, nursing homes, made visits, and tending to the flock that God's given me in different places. And I've been asked by people in the hospital to do things for them. And it's an honor that they'd ask, things that are maybe difficult. I've got a weak stomach, and there are things I've done for people in the hospital. It's a humiliating thing to get sick. It really is. To every need has to be cared for by someone else. And I've sat with people in the hospital that just grown men, just ashamed for whatever reason to be in the situation there. They don't want to be taken care of. They're the ones that have taken care of somebody else. And so it's a humbling thing God brings us through. But in that we see God working, doing. In chapter 13, verse 4, the last reference I want to give you, it says, for though he was crucified through weakness, yet he liveth by the power of God. For we also are weak in him, but we shall live with him by the power of God toward you. And so there's just a few things, some statements I want to make real quick. This weakness, frailty, distress versus power, strength, glory, honor that God can bring in that. The first thing is this: we don't like the look of weakness. We don't applaud it very often. We don't lift it up as this noble thing. We applaud capabilities, talents. We applaud people that have skills. I think we ought to do an excellent job. I think we ought to practice at whatever we're doing. I think we ought to be as skilled as is possible. But God often doesn't use the skilled people. He uses people that are struggling, people that are physically limited. They have some incredible influence many times. We're captivated by people's stories, what they've overcome. And that gives them influence, gives them power. It's God's power speaking through them. When weak, the glory belongs to Him. I can't get applauded for that. God did something in the weakness. God's taken this vessel that maybe is struggling, and He does something in and through me. I don't deserve the applause. The glory belongs to Him. His power is shown in a greater way in weakness, and we become a greater conduit of His work in a greater way when we're in weakness. And I don't know that I'll understand it this side of heaven, that somehow God could do a greater work with me and in me in my weakness, in some disability that someone has. God could do a greater work. Yes. Our faith in Him is shown when we're corrupt, when we're somehow dishonored, somehow when we're weak. And it shows our faith when we trust the fact that maybe in this life, we've not been everything we could have been physically, mentally. That shows our faith that when we see that at some point this is going to turn a corner, that there's something greater ahead of us, that this life has been maybe some people incredible weakness. They have incredible things they've overcome and are overcoming, but our faith shows this, that one day this is all going to be very different. There will be glory to taste. There will be honor. We'll hear that, well done. We maybe didn't get the applause in this life, but we'll have the thanks of the Lord, the blessing of God, and we'll know power beyond imagination when we walk with Him. Now, true power is had in real weakness. Gladness comes in true weakness. It can. And we understand that if it can be hard, but we still know the joy of the Lord, that God can give us such a peace in our struggle. I want you to notice that last verse I read you, that He, in 2 Corinthians 13:4, He was crucified, it says, through weakness. He knew weakness for us. He went through this weakness. He allowed Himself to be crucified. He gave Himself over in this thing. And it brought the power of God. He liveth by the power of God. He rose again by the power of God. And so His weakness brought us life. It says that we shall live with Him by the power of God towards you. I'm living in the power of the Lord. His weakness has brought me life. And no doubt, the weak times in my life, it'll help to bring life, hopefully, to other people. Weakness is near. It's not that far away. Any day may bring something that would be a heavy load. It could be very near. It is needy. Paul recognized that, and David recognized that weakness it's needed in us. The ability to say, Lord, do whatever you need to do. I'm willing to taste humiliation, shame, pain, suffering. The apostles rejoiced that they were beaten, beaten for his name. So it is not only needy, it is normal. It is normal for a Christian. It would be abnormal for us to go very long and not know something about weakness. So I hope that's a help to you. I hope it's a blessing to you. And I got to be honest, I'm still pondering some of the allowing ourselves to step into this, the agreement to be content in whatever state. I think sometimes we think that we're just going to do without something. It could be doing without everything, possibly. Can we be content in that? Pressed into something, pushed down, persecuted? Are we willing to be content there? That he might shine, that he would be lifted up in us, through us? May God help me. I hope the answer would be yes in every situation. But I don't know. I don't know till I get there. I hope I'd be strong for him. I hope I'd have some moral courage, no matter what I go through. May God do a great work in your life. May God use you at every season, every corner, every turn, every moment. And I know he wants to. And if he uses us, what a privilege to be used for the cause of Christ. And it could bring eternal reward. And that's what I'm hoping for you. May God bless you. May God use you. If you don't know Christ as your Savior, that's the first step in this walk with him. Trust him today. Let me encourage you. Trust him right now and taste salvation. And if I can help you in any way with that, let me know. God bless you.